Hi there, Read 516. It's Dr. Chrysler. Welcome to week 5. This week we're going to be talking about some of the word recognition tasks that we're going to be assessing in our students. But first I wanted to take a look at some of the stuff that's going on this week and that we just went over. So of course, thank you all for uploading your videos to the wiki. I know there was a little bit of a learning curve for some of us, but I think we've all worked it out. And as I stated before, the reason for having it on the wiki rather than having it on Titanium is really to make it easier for me to be able to grade everything and look at it and give you feedback in a timely manner. If I have the videos somewhere like Google Drive and then I have the Whopper pages and the assessment artifacts somewhere in Titanium, just the pulling them all up and getting everything up so I can look at it takes a lot of time. And so if I have everything on one page and I can use that comment feature to give you feedback, it really saves a lot of time, and I can keep up with it in terms of looking at it on a weekly basis because it just goes so much faster. So thank you again. Um, so speaking of then, congratulations on completing that first Whopper, right? So that was due this week. I'll be taking a look at them during the week. Just from what I've seen so far, a few of you have already submitted the completed ones. They look really good, so keep it up. Make sure that every week, this is just some quick feedback, that you give those required assessments. So you're checking that assessment chart, which ones are required, which ones are optional. Make sure that you're submitting all those assessment artifacts. So you can just scan them in and post them to the wiki. I saw a few people took some pictures. That works too, depending on how big those file sizes are, but make sure that you submit all of those. Use any samples that have been provided to help you kind of understand what the expectations of the assignments are. So hopefully that one completed Whopper and then the pieces of assessment that we gave you or I gave you during the screencast should be helpful as well. And then remember that your interpretations are based, of course, on the actual quantitative data that you're getting from the assessments, but also use qualitative data. And, maybe the data not just from what the assessment says, but from the things that you noticed, right? That idea of the anecdotal records and other things that you noticed in giving the assessment and your interactions with the student. And then you can try, when you look at that quantitative and qualitative piece, you see how it corresponds to the actual responses that they gave, and then the strengths and the needs in terms of the student's abilities there. But then also don't forget that discussion of the assessment limitations. So that's part of the reflection, right? What did the assessment tell me about that student's strengths and weaknesses in this particular area of literacy, but also, how good is the assessment in terms of the information I get? What do I perceive some of those perhaps limitations of the assessment could be? All right, so this week we do have a participation activity. We've got some other things too, but we are going to do a participation activity, and that's going to be what I call running records homework or a miscue analysis. So you'll see a short video and you'll be able to hear a file of a student reading, and then I have the passage for you, and I'd like you to practice doing that. The reason being is that you're going to be actually doing a running record, and so if you've never done one before, it's a good idea to practice before you actually get in front of the student. So go ahead, that will be your participation activity for the week in place of a discussion forum. But you still have your, look at that. You still have your other assignments due. So this week, what you will be turning in by Monday is your assessment artifacts and the reflection for a student to, assessment artifacts and the reflection for session 2, right, for the first student. So last week, you just turned in the Whopper 1, and then this week, you're going to do session 2 and you're going to video that, right? So then it's confusing. You got video 1, session 2, but you are going to make a video of session 2. So session 2 should be planned because you planned that last week. This week you implement it, you do the video, and then you're planning session 3, right? And then I'm going to ask you to do that running records homework as well. So busy week, lots of stuff to do. So thinking ahead to session 3, what you're going to focus on this week in terms of the planning piece is that decoding and word recognition focus. So the required assessments for the week are the core phonics survey, the Fry and Sue word list, and some sort of additional assessment of your choice. And you're going to be doing a video for session 3 as well. So that is listed on your course calendar and on your assessment chart. So an idea of some of the optional assessments, you've got ones that you can do for phonics, sight words, the multisyllabic ones, and we'll go over some of those further on in the presentation. All right, so make sure that you take a look at all of the resources that I have put on Titanium for you. All right, so actually for this lecture, let's talk about what we're going to do. We're going to be able to explain the importance of phonics, decoding, word recognition, sight words, high frequency words, and then you are going to select and administer diagnostics for phonics, word recognition, and decoding. And then of course be able to analyze those assessment results. So let's talk a little bit about decoding and word study, right? So I always like to start us with a quote. Learning to read words is fundamental to understanding text. Although proficient readers use multiple strategies for figuring out unfamiliar words, the most reliable strategy is decoding, the ability to convert a word from print to speech, right? So we cannot underestimate the importance of the ability to decode. So in order to be able to do that, students must be taught how to decode regular words, and we call that phonics, right? How to identify irregular words, they're sight words, or we often refer to them as sight words, and then how to use word parts to read multisyllabic words. So all of these require a strong foundation in print awareness and phonological awareness, as we discussed last week. So I'm going to just talk briefly about Erie's phases of word recognition development. You are likely familiar with this. We've hit on it before, talked a little bit about it in some of the chapters in best practices in 536, so it shouldn't be completely unfamiliar. Sorry, I need to get a sip of water. My throat is dry today. So these phases of word recognition development, they may help you in doing some of your analysis. But first we've got that pre-alphabetic phase, right? So in this pre-alphabetic phase, students read visual cues. So they've got, little working knowledge of the alphabetic principle. So, no understanding that letters in words map onto sounds. They focus on non-alphabetic graphic features. For example, they would read stop upon seeing a stop sign. So that's a really common one. If you have your own kids, you probably realize that that was one of the kind of first words that they knew, right? Stop, because they see it all the time. But it's limited to reading words from memory and then guessing based on concept. So if you ever watched like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old try to read, and they look at the picture and they just start guessing, but they're not using necessarily what the word looks like to guess what the word is. They're using other cues based on either what they're hearing in the story or what they see from the pictures. Then we move to the partial alphabetic phase. So there you start to get some kind of sound and spelling correspondence. So they develop this, rudimentary knowledge of the alphabetic principle. They start to use letters, and usually that initial letter and the context to try to guess the unfamiliar word. So the word that they guess, may start with an S because that word starts with an S. But they know some of the consonant sounds, and the ones that, the letter names contain those sounds. So things like M or B or D or P, they have some of those. They're not really able to use use analogizing as a tool, since their sight word store isn't large enough. They don't really have enough of those yet in order to, make guesses based on analogy. And with a lot of kids at this phase, they don't necessarily have that left to right orientation really solidified yet, right? So they could see the word saw and they could read it as the word was, right? And that's something that if you spend time with small kids, you see them do quite often. They'll just take those letters and they'll flip them around. So then they go into that full alphabetic phase. So here they develop a good working knowledge of the major sound symbol correspondence, and they are able to use that knowledge to start to decode unfamiliar words. They can now start to read words by analogy because they've got more sight words stored up. Their reading is often kind of slow, and they're decoding a lot of things, but their fluency and their speed and their ability to read will grow as their store of sight words grows, their vocabulary increases, and they gain that familiarity with the way that sounds are typically blended to create words, right? So they just start to really take off and improve in this stage. Then they get into the consolidated alphabetic stage, and here they really develop that solid working knowledge of the recurring spelling patterns and the most commonly occurring suffixes. They can store much longer words into memory, so the sight words become much larger because they are able to now look at those words and recognize the word parts in chunks, right? So they can really store a great many more words, and they start to develop their knowledge about the more complex sound symbol correspondences. So for example, things like silent E, right? They start to really memorize that and understand how that works when they see those words. And then in their automatic phase, they are proficient word readers. So they recognize most words that they come across in text automatically by sight, and their ability to apply all of the different word recognition strategies that they have is really, you can see it here. So they've kind of mastered that, and they've got lots of strategies that they can use to attack those unfamiliar words. And they often will, if they are, they're not really guessing, but when they are sounding out those more complex words, they're usually, they get it right, or they just get one little part of it wrong, right? So, fully proficient word readers at that stage. So this kind of gives you an idea of, as you as you look at the results you're getting from your student, where they are in these phases of word recognition development. And then perhaps in the students that you teach or your own kids, you get an idea of where they're going if they're older than the student that you're currently working with. So let's spend a little time then talking about phonics, right? So we're not going to do a huge piece about it because it's something that we should have under our belts at this point of the program, but we can always use a refresher. And actually, you know what? I'll stop the screencast here because I'm about to run out of time, so I'll pick up on this slide on the next one.